Before freezers, before chemical preservatives, how was a successful hunt not a race against rot? On the vast plains, a single kill had to feed a family for an entire winter. The answer was a lost technology, a superfood created from ingenious science, perfectly engineered, to last for years. This is the story of the hidden method Native Americans used to keep meat fresh. Act. The problem of plenty. Survival for most of human history has been defined by two fundamental challenges: acquiring food and, once acquired, keeping it. In the modern world, we have solved the second problem with a simple humming box, the refrigerator. Our food system is a marvel of refrigerated trucks, vacuum-sealed plastics, and chemical preservatives. We live in a perpetual artificial summer. This convenience has come at a cost. We have become disconnected. We have forgotten the mortal enemy of all hunters, all societies, all civilizations until the last 100 years: decay. Meat, the most prized and calorie-dense food source, is also the most fleeting. The moment an animal's life ends, a clock starts. Bacteria, microorganisms, and enzymes begin their relentless work. Within hours, in the heat days, in the cold, a life-giving bounty becomes a life-threatening poison. For the indigenous peoples of North America, this was the central paradox. A single bison could weigh over 2,000 pounds, providing more than 800 pounds of usable meat. A successful hunt was a moment of incredible plenty, a sudden windfall of millions of calories. But it was also a logistical crisis. How could a nomadic or semi-nomadic band with no access to metal, no refrigerators and no salt mines possibly preserve this much food before it spoiled? How could they make the bounty of a single autumn day last through the brutal, lean months of a prairie winter? You have to understand, this wasn't just a casual problem. It was the problem. Your entire society, your ability to survive the winter, your ability to feed your children, your ability to conduct ceremonies or go on long journeys, it all depended on solving the problem of protein preservation. And they did solve it, not with one method, but a suite of methods. But one of them was revolutionary. It was, without exaggeration, a form of technological genius. We are familiar with some of the methods. Drying, turning meat into jerky, a practice as old as humanity itself. We know smoking, where the chemical compounds in the wood smoke not only flavor the meat, but act as an antimicrobial and antioxidant shield. And in coastal regions, salting was a powerful tool. But on the vast interior plains, salt was a rare and precious commodity. And while jerky and smoked meat are good, they have flaws. Jerky is brittle, can still absorb moisture from the air, and can go rancid. It's bulky for its caloric value. It is a temporary solution. To last for months or even years, you needed something else, something better, something that didn't just slow decay, but stopped it completely. We had a food that the explorers, the fur traders, they called it, the staff of life. They couldn't survive without it. It was better than their bread, better than their salted pork. They called it pemmican. But for us, it was just life. It was the hunt, preserved. It was the sun, the berries, the animal, all of it in one food. And it would not spoil. Pemmican. The word itself comes from the Cree word pimikan, meaning to make grease. This is not a story about jerky. This is a story about a sophisticated multi-step biochemical process perfected over thousands of years. It's a process that combines two elements, dehydrated protein and rendered anhydrous fat, to create an entirely new, indestructible substance. This is the hidden method. Not a single trick, but a precise scientific system for creating a perfectly preserved, calorie-dense, and portable superfood. And to understand it, we must begin with the first and most critical step. Act 2. The Foundations of Forever. The Plains Method. The story of the classic, hidden method begins with the source, the American bison or tatanka in the Lakota language. For the dozens of nations of the Great Plains, the Lakota, Cheyenne, Blackfoot, Crow, Comanche, the bison was the center of the universe. It provided food, tools, shelter, and clothing. Its preservation was a sacred and scientific art, mastered by and large by the women of the tribe. The process began immediately. The animal was field-dressed, the hide removed. The choice cuts, the tenderloins, the tongue, the liver were often eaten immediately, a fresh, iron-rich reward for the hunters. But the vast bulk of the muscle, the great haunches and back straps, was destined for preservation. This is where the genius begins. Step 1. The elimination of water. The first enemy of preservation is water. Every living cell is mostly water, and bacteria thrive in moisture. The first step, therefore, is absolute, total dehydration. This is not jerky, as we know it, thick, chewy, and salty. The meat for pemmican had to be prepared differently. You would see the women working. My grandmother told me the stories. The knife had to be sharp, tsinini, thin. You had to slice it with the grain, not against it. Long, thin, paper-thin strips. You wanted the wind to be able to pass through it. You wanted the sun to hit every part. You were flaking the meat. These racks of flaked meat were a common sight in any plains village. The meat was sliced and hung in the hot, dry prairie wind. The sun and the wind would wick the moisture away in a matter of hours. This is the critical difference. Modern jerky might have a 10% to 20% moisture content. It's pliable. The meat prepared for pemmican was dehydrated until it was almost 0% moisture. It was brittle. You could snap it like a potato chip. It wasn't jerky. It was meat glass. It was a protein matrix with all H2 molecules violently expelled. In leaner times or in regions with more humidity like the woodlands, this drying would be fire-assisted. A low, slow, cold smoke would be built under the racks. The smoke would drift up, keeping flies and insects away, while the warmth of the fire, never hot enough to cook, would accelerate the dehydration. The phenolic compounds from the smoke would also add their own antimicrobial layer. But for the classic plains pemmican, the sun and wind were the primary tools. The result was a substance that was protein and nothing else. But this incredibly was only the first step. Step 2. The pulverization. This meat glass, while preserved, was difficult to eat and still had a major floor surface area. Even a dry piece of jerky has nooks and crannies where a stray bacteria or mold spore, given the slightest humidity, could take hold. The solution: destroy the surface area. The dried meat was pulverized. It was pounded, shattered, and ground down until it was no longer strips of jerky, but a fine, fluffy, almost powdered substance. The Lakota called this wasna, or ground up. This was hard work, hours of it. The sound of the pemmican pounder was the sound of winter security. It was the sound of a good home. They would pound it down to fibers like cotton, a meat floss, or a meat flour. It had to be fine. No chunks, no big pieces. Every fiber had to be separated. From a chemical perspective, this step is brilliant. You are radically increasing the surface area of the protein, which will allow for a complete and total saturation by the preservative agent in the next step. You're leaving no part of the meat fiber exposed. You're preparing it to be encapsulated. This meat flour was light portable, and a single bison could be reduced to a few rawhide bags of it. It was a remarkable food in its own right. But it was still lean. It was just protein. It lacked the most crucial element for long-term survival and preservation: fat. Step 3. The liquid gold. The bison provided muscle, but it also provided vast quantities of hard white fat, known as sweat. This back fat, along with the fat from the organs and the rich nourishing marrow from within the bones, was the second key ingredient. This fat, however, is full of water and tissues. In its raw state, it too will rot. It had to be purified. The fat was rendered. It was chopped and slowly heated, often with a bit of water, in a process of wet rendering. The heat melts the fat, separating it from the solid tissues, which would be skimmed off and eaten as cracklings. The pure liquid fat, the tallow being lighter than water, would rise to the top. This is again a precise chemical purification. The substance they are creating is anhydrous fat. Anhydrous means without water. Pure rendered tallow has virtually no moisture content, and where there is no water, bacteria cannot grow. Furthermore, this pure fat has another magic property: it is hydrophobic. It actively repels water. This liquid gold, this purified tallow, was skimmed off and collected. It was the energy of the bison, distilled into its purest form. It was a high-octane fuel for the human body, a source of dense calories to fight the cold. And most importantly, it was the perfect preservative. Step 4. The antioxidant. There was one final ingredient, a regional and seasonal choice that added a touch of culinary genius. While the meat was being pounded and the fat was being rendered, others, often children, would be out foraging. Berries. Most commonly, the tart, astringent choke cherry. These berries were not just for flavor, though they did provide a crucial sweetness and tang to cut the richness of the fat. They were not just for nutrition, though they provided essential vitamin C, preventing the scurvy that plagued European explorers who lived on salted meat. The berries served a chemical purpose. The one remaining enemy of this food is oxidation. The fat, the tallow, is stable, but over many months, contact with oxygen in the air will cause it to go rancid. It spoils. The berries, especially dark-skinned berries like chokecherries and saskatoons, are packed with antioxidants and tannins. These compounds are natural preservatives. They actively slow the process of oxidation. They are the final piece of the puzzle. They were preventing the fat from going bad. The berries were pounded pits, and all which added another nutrient and binding agent into a mash. Now all three ingredients were ready: the meat flour, the liquid gold, and the antioxidant paste. Step 5. The final assembly. The scene is one of careful assembly. The wasna the ground meat is placed in a container. The berry mash is folded in. The ratios were a matter of skill, experience, and intended use. A war pemmican might be almost all meat and fat for maximum energy. A winter pemmican would have more berries for vitamins and flavor. The ratio was often by volume, 50% pulverized meat and 50% liquid tallow. The hot tallow is poured in. This is the moment of synthesis. The liquid fat, heated, penetrates everything. It flows into every microscopic space in the meat flour, coating every single protein fiber. It surrounds the berry fragments. It drives out any remaining pockets of air. It had to be mixed well. You used a big wooden paddle. You stirred and stirred until everything was covered in the grease. No dry spots. A dry spot is where the trouble can start. It has to be completely saturated. It becomes one food. This warm, thick paste was then packed tightly into rawhide bags. It was tamped down, pounded down to ensure no air pockets remained. As the mixture was layered into the bag, more hot tallow would be poured on top, creating a final perfect seal. The bag was stitched shut with sinew and left to cool. As the tallow cooled, it solidified, returning to a hard, waxy white solid. The entire mixture, meat, berries, and fat, was now locked in a solid, anaerobic, oxygen-free matrix of pure anhydrous fat. Bacteria couldn't grow. There was no water. Mold couldn't grow. There was no water and no oxygen. The fat wouldn't go rancid. It was protected by the antioxidants in the berries. The protein wouldn't decay. It was sealed away from the elements. The result was a brick of food, a dense, heavy, energy-packed substance that required no refrigeration, no special care. It could be dropped frozen solid or baked in the prairie sun, and it would not spoil. It's perfect. It's biochemically perfect. You have complete protein. You have high-quality, stable saturated, and mono-unsaturated fats for energy. You have complex carbohydrates and vitamins from the berries. It is a complete meal. It's the original MRE meal, ready to eat. And its shelf life, we're not talking weeks, we're talking months, years. There are reports of pemmican stored in rawhide bags being perfectly edible after 10, 20, even 50 years. It's an indestructible food. That was your winter security. When the snows were deep and the hunters couldn't find anything, you had the pemmican. You could eat it cold, just chew on a piece. It's hard, but it's rich. Or the best way, you shave it into the pot with some snow, boil it, maybe throw in a wild onion if you have one. And you have rubaboo, a hot, rich stew that would warm you from the inside out. It was the food that kept the people alive. Act thread, the forest and the maple. The Plains nations perfected the bison pemmican, but the principle of preservation, dehydrated protein sealed in anhydrous fat, was not limited to the prairies. This hidden method was a continent-wide technology, adapted and perfected by hundreds of nations, each using the specific gifts of their own environment. In the vast eastern woodlands and the boreal forests to the north, the central animal was not the bison, but the deer, the moose, and the caribou. The challenge in the woodlands is different. The primary enemy is not just bacteria, but humidity. The air is heavy with moisture. You cannot simply hang your meat in the sun and wind as you can on the plains. The meat would mold or rot long before it ever dried. Here, the drying process relied on the one constant of a forest environment would. The solution was smoke drying. This was not the hot smoking we use for barbecue, which cooks the meat. This was a cold smoke, a process that could take days, even weeks. A fire of specific hardwoods, hickory, maple, apple, or alder, would be kept at a low, smouldering temperature. The heat was just enough to create a slow, steady updraft that would rise, carrying the smoke, and pass over the thinly sliced strips of venison or moose meat. This process is doing three things at once, and it's beautiful. First, the low, dry heat is slowly dehydrating the meat, just like on the plains. Second, the smoke itself is a physical barrier, keeping flies and insects from landing on the meat. But third and most important is the chemistry. The wood smoke itself is a preservative. Wood smoke contains hundreds of chemical compounds, but the most important are phenols and aldehydes. These compounds are powerful antimicrobials and antioxidants. They kill bacteria on contact, and they penetrate the meat, preventing the fats within the muscle from going rancid. The meat is not only dried, it is cured. This smoke-dried meat, or jerky, was a staple food. But like the jerky of the plains, it was only step one. To make it last through the long, humid summers and deep, snowy winters, it had to be made into a pemmican-like substance. The process was similar. The hard, smoke-dried meat was pounded into a meat flour. The fat, however, presented a new challenge. Deer and moose are famously lean animals. Unlike the bison, they do not carry thick layers of back fat. The fat they do have the sweat around the kidneys is prized, but there isn't enough to create the vast quantities of tallow needed to seal the meat. So the people of the forest turned to another animal, the bear. The black bear was in many ways the bison of the woodlands in terms of its fat. A single large bear, especially in the fall when it has been fattening up on acorns and berries, can yield gallons of fat. Bear grease or lard was the liquid gold of the forest. The bear fat was rendered down, just like the bison tallow, creating a pure, stable and powerful preservative oil. But the woodlands peoples had one more secret ingredient, a gift from their most sacred tree that the plains nations did not: maple sugar. The Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and other nations had mastered the art of tapping the sugar maple, boiling the sap down, long past the syrup stage, until it crystallized into hard, stable blocks of sugar. Sugar, like salt, is a preservative. My ancestors in the Great Lakes, they would pound the smoked deer meat. They would mix it with the bear grease, and then they would mix in the maple sugar. It was a different kind of food, sweet and smoky and rich. This is a brilliant adaptation. The sugar is a humectant, meaning it binds to any available water molecules, making them unavailable for bacterial growth. Just like salt. So this woodlands pemmican had 3 layers of preservation: the dehydration from the smoke drying, the anaerobic seal from the bear grease, and the chemical preservation from the smoke's phenols and the sugar's humectant properties. It was a food perfectly adapted to its environment. It fought the high humidity of the forest with smoke and sugar. It was a complete meal protein from the deer energy from the bear fat and carbohydrates from the maple sugar. It was the fuel that allowed trackers to move silently through the forest for days on end, carrying all their provisions in a single small pouch. The hidden method was not a rigid recipe. It was a flexible concept, a scientific principle applied with local genius. Act Darforth, the land of ice and oil. But what if your environment offers no sun to dry meat? No wind, only a frigid gale? What if there are no berries, no maple trees and no forests for firewood in the most extreme environment on Earth? The Arctic, the Inuit and other northern nations faced the problem of preservation in its starkest form. And their solution, while following the same core principles, was a radical and brilliant departure. Here the central animal was the seal and the walrus. These animals provided protein, but more importantly, they provided a thick, rich, life-giving layer of blubber. In the high Arctic, fat is not just a preservative. Fat is life. It's the primary source of calories, vitamins, and heat. The Inuit diet is by necessity a high-fat diet. So their preservation methods are all about fat. The primary preservation agent in the Arctic was not rendered anhydrous tallow. It was seal oil. The process was simple and efficient. Blubber was cut from the seal and placed in a sealskin bag or puk, which was then left to ferment slightly. The fermentation would break down the cell walls, and the oil would separate and collect. This oil, rich in omega-3s, was the staple food, the cooking medium, and the preservative. Meat, like caribou or seal, would be cut into strips, but instead of being dried, it was submerged. The Inuit method is a form of submersion pickling, but instead of using vinegar or brine, they use oil. Strips of meat and fish would be placed in a sealskin bag, and then pure seal oil would be poured over it, filling the bag to the top and driving out all the air. The bag is then sealed. This is the same principle as pemmican. The protein meat is placed in an anaerobic, oxygen-free environment, sealed by an anhydrous, water-free liquid. The oil coats the meat, preventing any bacteria on its surface from multiplying. The cold Arctic temperatures do the rest. This method could be used to preserve meatfish and even birds. A famous delicacy kiviak involves stuffing a sealskin with dozens of small birds' feathers, and all sealing it with blubber and burying it for months. The result is a fermented, pickled bird, perfectly preserved and nutritious. But the Arctic offered another even stranger method of preservation, one that seems to the modern mind counterintuitive: fermentation. This is iguanak, or kopalhen, a large piece of meat, often with its skin and blubber intact, is buried in the peaty frozen tundra and left for months. This is not rotting. This is controlled anaerobic fermentation. The permafrost is cold, just above or below freezing. The meat is buried so there is no oxygen. In this environment, the Clostridium botulinum bacteria, the one that causes botulism, cannot thrive. Instead, a different set of anaerobic bacteria begins to break down the proteins and fats. This process, similar to the curing of a dry-aged steak or a prosciutto, transforms the meat. It becomes tender, pungent, and incredibly rich in nutrients. The fermentation process makes vitamins more available and pre-digests the proteins, making them easier for the body to absorb. To the uninitiated, it's a very acquired taste. But from a survival standpoint, it's genius. You are using the bacteria itself as a preservative. The good bacteria create an environment so acidic and so specific that the bad, pathogenic bacteria cannot grow. It's a form of biological warfare on a microscopic level. It's an incredibly advanced technique discovered thousands of years ago. From the sun-baked plains to the humid forests to the frozen ice, the hidden method reveals itself. It is not one thing. It is a deep scientific understanding of the elements remove water, remove oxygen, and if you can fight oxidation with antioxidants like berries or smoke, or harness microbes like fermentation. This was the knowledge that allowed human beings to thrive in every corner of the most challenging continent on Earth. Acht Yef, the legacy and the lost knowledge. In the 18th and 19th centuries, when Europeans pushed west, they did not do so on their own terms. They survived because of pemmican. The fur trade, the entire economic engine of the Northwest Company and the Hudson's Bay Company, did not run on beaver pelts. It ran on pemmican. The voyageurs, the French-Canadian men who paddled the canoes from Montreal to the deep west, could not have done their jobs without it. Their salted pork would rot. Their flour would get wet. But pemmican was indestructible. It was the perfect canoe fuel. A single 90-pound bag a toro could feed a man for months. It was compact, it was calorie-dense, and it didn't spoil. The demand became so high that it created an entire economy. The Métis people of mixed indigenous and European heritage became the primary suppliers. They would hunt the bison, and the Métis women would prepare the pemmican on an industrial scale, packing it into the rawhide bags and selling it to the trading posts. It became a currency. It became a strategic resource. In 1814, the Pemmican Proclamation, an attempt by a governor to control the pemmican trade, led to a violent conflict known as the Pemmican War. Men fought and died for control of this superfood. Lewis and Clark on their expedition, they survived because they were smart enough to buy tons of it from the Mandan. Later explorers like Robert Peary on his expeditions to the North Pole relied on pemmican. They considered it the only food scientifically proven to support hard labor in extreme conditions. It was the original energy bar. But the story of pemmican is also a story of cultural loss. The 19th century destruction of the bison herds was not just an ecological catastrophe. It was a deliberate act of cultural and economic warfare. By destroying the bison, the US government and the railroads destroyed the food supply, the economy, and the spiritual center of the Plains nations. With the bison gone, the pemmican was gone. You take away the bison, you take away the tatanka, you take away everything. The tipi, the tools, the ceremonies, and the food. The knowledge was, it was still there in the minds of the grandmothers. But the source was gone. The people were forced onto reservations. They were given government rations, white flour, sugar, lard, the things that make you sick. The indestructible food was replaced by the food of dependence. The knowledge of the hidden method was not lost, but it was buried. The meticulous scientific process of dehydration pulverization and anaerobic sealing was replaced by canned goods and refrigerators. The method that had sustained entire nations for millennia was relegated to a historical curiosity, a footnote in the journals of European explorers. Until now, in a strange and powerful resurgence, the hidden method is being rediscovered. Survivalists and preppers, obsessed with self-sufficiency and bug-out bags, have seized upon pemmican as the ultimate survival food. They have reverse-engineered the recipes from old journals, recognizing that a food that needs no refrigeration and lasts for decades is the holy grail of emergency preparedness. The ancestral health movement from paleo to keto to carnivore diets has championed pemmican as a bioavailable superfood. They see it as the perfect combination of clean protein and healthy fats, free of the sugars and processed grains that define the modern diet. Artisanal butchers and online ancestral food companies are now selling beef and bison pemmican for premium prices. And most importantly, within indigenous communities, there is a powerful movement of cultural revitalization. Young people are looking to their elders relearning the old ways, not as a historical reenactment, but as a vital and living part of their identity. They are relearning the language, the ceremonies, and the food. When we teach this, we're not just teaching a recipe. We're teaching a philosophy. We're teaching respect for the animal. We're teaching the patience to do it right. We're teaching the science that our ancestors knew in their bones. When a young person makes wasna for the first time, they are connecting to a line of knowledge that is thousands of years old. They are eating the same food their great-great-great-grandmother made. That's power. We live in a world of profound technological complexity, yet we have become profoundly fragile. Our food system, our power grid, our digital lives, they are all dependent on a delicate, unbroken chain of inputs. The story of pemmican, the story of the hidden method, is more than a survival show curiosity. It is a testament. It proves that with deep observation, patient experimentation, and a profound respect for the natural world, our ancestors solved problems so fundamental we have forgotten they are problems at all. It is a reminder that the world is full of knowledge hidden in plain sight in the practices of those who came before. It is a science of sustainability, of resilience, of survival. A science that, in a fragile and uncertain world, we may need to learn again. The story of pemmican is more than a recipe. It's a testament to human ingenuity and a deep scientific understanding of the natural world. This knowledge, once powering entire nations, is a vital part of our shared human heritage. It's a method hidden in plain sight. If you found this journey into the past valuable, please like this video and share it to help this knowledge spread. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into lost survival technologies. What ancient knowledge should we explore next? Let us know in the comments.